Hello and welcome to Views Metro. My name is Murtaza Dar. Today we're going to discuss about Iran, the relations of Iran with the rest of the countries. Also, we're going to discuss the Iranian nuclear talks which are happening in Vienna right now. Iran, along with the rest of the powers, are sitting in Vienna and discussing the possibilities and checking how they would resume 2015 JCPOA agreement, which was unilaterally withdrawn by the United States. Today we're also going to discuss about Iran's relation with Saudi Arabia and see why they are talking and why they would want to have good relations with Saudi Arabia, where there's a resentment within Iran about relations with Saudi Arabia. In fact, good relations with Saudi Arabia. We'll expand our conversation on the ongoing protests, the farmer protests, which is expanding every other day, and why Iranians are not focused on that and they're focused more on the proxies in different parts of the world. We'll check what is happening in Iranian camps about the threats and the warnings being issued by the Israelis, how serious they are, and what kind of plan they have in their minds. Today, we're going to discuss this all with our very eminent guest, Mr. Mustafa Khoshcheshm, who's joining us from Tehran. We'll expand and we'll take all these questions to him and see how would he respond to the situation. Welcome to the show, Mr. Mustafa.
There are lots of things that I would want to talk about Iran, but right now, the most important is the beginning of the 8th round of Vienna talks, the nuclear talks that they're going right now. I mean, I understand you being an Iranian would have another prism to see things, but if I ask you to give a 360 view, being a rational analyst, how do you see Vienna talks heading forward? I mean, is this in the right direction or something is missing somewhere?
Hello, and thanks for having me. Well, first of all, this is not going to be the 8th round. It's still the 7th round. There have been some pauses, and in 3 weeks they've been talking to each other with a few days of pauses until they give a joint statement or a draft for this round. We would call it the 7th round of talks in Vienna. Well, the whole story, the JCPOA was worked out by the United States in order to contain Iran. If they meant to go for Iran's nuclear capability, if they had any kind of worries, then they would have stuck to the nuclear deal because it provides them with the harshest regime of inspections ever imposed on any nation. So they should have kept it, actually. But the point here is that, as John Kerry, the former Secretary of State of the United States, said, even they would have discarded the nuclear deal if Iran would have not gone for talks over its regional power, missile power, and other power components. So this is just phase one of several phases. And in the end, what they hope to do is containing Iran's overall power. And it's not going to end after they talk about Iran's missile industry or regional power or nuclear power. They would continue that. That's the only formula they had for the past 2 decades. They had put lots of efforts in that, lots of energy, time, and money in order to develop this strategy. And this containment strategy would not, cannot be replaced. They don't have anything else. If military option is talked about, we don't believe it's any option anymore, especially after Iranian missiles rained down on Assad U.S. airbase in Western Iraq, and Global Hawk was shut down, and they never responded, actually, despite threats by Donald Trump. And with regard to the sanctions, they have already done their best, and we are more than 1.5 years after the peak of efficiency of the sanctions. And they have already sanctioned all Iranian sectors, economic sectors, actors and players and companies several times. So they don't have any other option at hand but to continue the talks, to revive the JCPOA. What they want is an updated version of the JCPOA that's not JCPOA 2015. What they want is JCPOA 2021. So what's the problem? The problem is that they want more from Iran in return for less. At the same time, let's remember that when 2015, JCPOA went into operation, Iran did its part. and held up its end of the bargain, according to IAEA and even according to Americans, European officials. But the Americans never removed the sanctions, but on the paper. I mean, in essence, nothing happened for Iranian economy, and they discarded the nuclear deal. So what Iran wants now is a revival of JCPOA, an actual one. Iran wants guarantees that they would not leave the nuclear deal again. And also, Iran wants to verify this time a removal of sanctions to see if it's for real, not like the last time. So, basically speaking, it's a tough job. And especially under the president administration of the revolutionary administration of President Raisi, people who voted for Raisi, they were critical of the JCPOA and they wanted to go tough on the United States and make sure that if JCPOA is revived and Iran holds up its end of the bargain again, it would not sustain losses like the last time. So basically, it's a tough job. But altogether, especially in this last round, I can see progress, but slow, at a slow pace, and it's a slow progress. We hope that they will wrap up this list of arguments and bargaining chips and items in a few days' time. Maybe next week they will be through with this agenda. And in 2022, January, actually the basic bargaining starts over the material and contents of this agenda. So we still have a tough job and tough days ahead.
Right. Mr. Mustafa, the delegates from all the Western camp, like Germany, like Britain, and like the French, the version they gave to the media is more of inclined towards Iranian using this time as a bargain, and they're enriching already. And there has been a dispute about Karaj as well, which has been, by the Iranians said that they will install the cameras and they're going to give the footages later on if the JCPOA is signed and all that. So this Western, if we call this even a propaganda or whatever, their narrative, that is gaining momentum. And that is that Iranians are already enriching. Although IAEA has rejected 90% enrichment, which was said by the Israelis. Do you think Iranians are doing this? Or if you don't think, then what is happening? Why West is saying this again and again?
Well, for about 8 years, President Rouhani and Mr. Zarif and Araghchi, his deputy foreign minister, they tried the appeasement strategy for 8 years, and Iran never earned anything. So those who voted for President Raisi, they were critics of this appeasement strategy, and they wanted Iran to shift this strategy to go tough on the United States, to use the leverages that it has. The 60% enrichment is one of the many leverages. Actually, Iran could do a lot more in nuclear industries, but still, it's just the nuclear leverage. Iran also has the missile leverage. It has a leverage in the region. It has many allies that could, make life very hard for the U.S. and Israeli regime. So I do believe that if the United States and its European allies do not work hard in order to arrive at the kind of deal with Iran to revive the JCPOA, then they would have harder days, because there are some people that are calling for more leverages to be brought up by Iran against the United States, and they are asking why Iran is not using those leverages. And if these talks fail, then Iran would be left with no other option but using all the leverages that it has, because it's not just these three that I just mentioned. Iran also has a wide variety of options that could work as leverages against the US and Israeli regime. Well, to be honest with you, when this new team of negotiators went to Vienna, they said, okay, in the drafts of Vienna 6, there were some points that were violating the JCPOA. JCPOA is the basic of our discussions. We are here all allegedly to revive JCPOA of 2015. But in the drafts of the Vienna six round of talks, there were some violations of JCPOA 6 in favor of the United States and its European allies. So the Iranian delegation asked for their removal and exclusion and revision. Also, in all rounds of Vienna talks, there is a small part that we call cleaned or cleared. That is to say, there is an agreement over these items, and they're gone, and we move on to the next items. These are no more than 10-20% of the whole drafts that have been done in Vienna talks from 1 to 6. 60 more percent of items are those that are points of differences. That is to say, Iran wants, for example, a removal of all JCPOA sanctions, as well as all the sanctions that came in practice after the JCPOA in violation of the JCPOA. But the United States says, I would remove only JCPOA sanctions. So in order not to stonewall the talks, the two sides agreed that they put there the maximum thing they would do and the least they would get. Still, there is a wide, difference between the two sides, and they moved on to the next item, next and next and next. 60% of all the things that have been written in there are like this, and they put two brackets in there, and some space to say that okay, we have not come into terms with each other over these issues. Now, this new Iranian delegation has filled in those brackets, but of course it has kept the brackets. That means it's negotiable. We are going to bargain about it. So since day one in this new round of talks, Vienna 7, there have been discussions if these changes to these drafts are acceptable to the Europeans or not. And as a matter of fact, some 80% of it is done. They have already agreed to do the revisions and add up these new points of differences to go under discussion and bargaining later. Now, in the next 4 days, since Monday, they would start talking about the remaining 20% to see if they would agree to any further points of bargaining and negotiations over these items that Iran wants or not.
Another very important question for Vienna is that Iranians definitely going to get a lot of benefit if the resumption of JCPOA is there, because the trade and everything will start working and money will start rolling. What benefit the West would get, especially the US, because there's a lot of resentment from Israeli camp, and there's a friction report between both countries as well. What benefit they're going to get out of this all JCPOA if we talk about them?
Yeah. Well, let me complete this last one thing about your last question. Well, the Europeans and Americans have been adamant to, agreeing to these demands. There are not too many, altogether, maybe 30-20%, I don't know. A small part has been changed in the Vienna talks, but they were adamant to agree to that. They started blame games, propaganda in order to resist, but actually, last week, they eventually agreed to discuss the points Iran wants and to include it in the new drafts. Iran needs to get economic benefits in full. It could sell, it should seek to be able to sell crude as much as it wants and return the money. In the US, well, they claim that they have suspicions about Iran's nuclear energy program. They have never found anything. The IAEA has done the largest number of man-hours of inspections of Iran, and they've never found anything before or after the JCPOA, but they want to ensure that Iran's civilian nuclear program would remain civilian. Well, what they want to do is harnessing Iran's nuclear capability. It doesn't matter if it's civilian or not, because they have been pressuring Iran under the JCPOA to stop even research and development in many areas that, one example is the heavy water that Iraq reactor produces. It's, very precious. each milliliter could be sent for hundreds of dollars, and it produces tons of heavy water, but they have contained it. They do not allow Iran to sell it. So they claim that this reactor could be used for other purposes, but while it's under full 24 hours inspections of the IAEA. So what they want to do is containing Iran's nuclear power. What Iran wants is economic merits. And there is a way to work out that kind of deal if the Americans prove to be honest, if they don't go after excessive demands, if they agree that they cannot contain Iran's power, if they are honest enough to make sure about Iran's nuclear capability, everything would go smoothly and fine. If not, if they stress, because they've already stressed that we would not remove the sanctions for more than 4 months, we would just suspend them. And you need to come to talk to us about your missile program, your regional power, your human rights, and many other things. Now, if that's the case, I believe there won't be a deal. But if they stick to this nuclear deal and revival of the JCPOA, honestly, they could arrive at the deal very smoothly.
Right. Okay. Let's move forward. There's a talk going on, or there's a talk going on about between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And there's a very strong school of thought which says that both countries have been rival for like decades. And there's a lot of things that Iranians have bared from the Saudis' camp. Now both sitting together, talking, and probably trying to make good relations. This is something that which is beyond the red lines. So we should not be friends with Saudis. What is your take on this?
Well, since the last year of President Rouhani, there have been moves on the Iranian and Saudi sides in order to come into terms with each other and bury the hatchet. Well, there have been 4 rounds of talks, and under President Raisi, even the new administration is much more interested to resolve the differences with Saudi Arabia, because Iran believes, that this new administration's main agenda is working on Iranian economy away from the JCPOA and sanctions. It has two main agendas. At home, it needs to develop domestic economies, especially those potentials that have been left intact. And also, when it comes to foreign policy, its main agenda is developing ties with the neighboring states. And if you want to develop economic ties in the region, you need to de-escalate the tensions with your main rival. That is, in this Persian Gulf region, it is Saudi Arabia. Already, Iran has worked out some mending of ties with the UAE after the UAE sent its top security official to Tehran and to mend ties and develop economic cooperation with Iran and trade. And when the U.S. sent a delegation to deter him, unless a JCPOA is arrived, the UAE rejected Americans' demands. So the two sides, Iran and the UAE, are already developing and improving their ties back to normal days. We hope that the Saudis would also do so. But the problem is that in the 4th round of talks between Iran and Saudi Arabia, the things didn't go ahead smoothly and well, because the Saudis are looking for a tactical solution. They want tactical talks just to, work out an end to the Yemen war, in a way that their reputation is not damaged. But what Iran wants is strategic talks to resolve the differences all around the world, all around the region. As soon as the Saudis come into, this sense that they could resolve all their differences with Iran all throughout the region in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere in Yemen, then everything would go ahead smoothly. But if they just concentrate on Yemen, Yemen is not Iran. They are allies, they are friends of Iran, but Iran has always stressed that it doesn't make decisions for other countries. It could encourage the Yemenis to do one thing or another, but I believe as the U.S. is withdrawing from the region and the equations are changing, the Saudis, like the UAE, would eventually come into their senses to, work out new order and new foreign policy, especially when it comes to Iran as a regional kingpin.
Okay, right. So there's another thing about this. I mean, there's a very strong voice which says that there's a protest going on, which has been tapered down for a while about the farmers in Iran, and they're protesting, and their quantum is in thousands, and it's reaching towards in millions. So Iranians not spending money on their own people, and they're spending money on the proxies, like in Yemen, like in other parts of the world, like Syria, like Lebanon, and all that. So this is something which is being always said by the Western media as well. So, how would you respond to the situation right now in your country about the water crisis and the rest of the crisis, and not spending money and spending money at the proxies?
Well, first of all, Iranians revolted against the former Pahlavi regime in order to earn their right to do protests, and they've been out protesting all the last 42 years. That's the constitutional rights of the Iranians. Secondly, no, that's wrong. Even according to the US media, they claim that Iran has spent some 10, 12 billion dollars in Syria, for example. That's not,
Yes.
that's 1,000 of what Americans have spent in this region in their two wars and the conflicts afterwards. But of course, how much Iran spends for domestic population, only not for development, but for routine budget is a little less than $1 billion a week. That is to say, if we agree to the numbers that the Americans, have released, and we do not agree with them, of course, that means only 12 weeks of Iranian spending altogether in the past 7, 8 years. What they claim, that's what they claim, and it's been lower than that, but maximum only 12 weeks. So it doesn't make any difference, actually. Some parts of the problems that people are protesting are climate things like scarce water. This is not specific to Iran. The whole world is suffering from, warming, and there is a problem everywhere. There have been mismanagements, of course, with regard to dam construction, with regard to water distribution, irrigation, farming, and the government is to blame also, as well as the community that have gone for rice cultivating in the south where water is scarce. And instead of, doing some other types of farming that's suitable for hot, climate conditions, they've gone for lucrative farming. So both sides should be blamed. But parts of the problems are, because of mismanagement. Parts of the problem are because of global problems. Part of the problem, 20%, is because of the sanctions. Sanctions
Right.
have made life harder, but they have failed to break the resolve of the Iranians and make them give in to the US demands. So Iran is a big nation. It could, the very fact that Iranians have done the reverse thing of what the United States and the White House wanted 2 years ago. John Bolton claimed that Iranians would revolt and topple the Islamic Republic, and this never happened. It shows that Iranians are understanding. They protest, but domestically they transfer, and they make their officials understand that they have problems. Of course they do have. I have problems too. But this doesn't mean that we are going to change the whole system. We don't want the system. We have democracy. We can change the governments, and we are waiting for Raisi to see if he can improve life in the next 1 or 1.5 years.
Right. Last question to you, Mr. Mustafa. There's a clear warning by Israel that if there's JCPOA resumption or there's no JCPOA resumption, in either case, we're going to attack them. How would you respond? The Iranians will respond to this threat? This is just a threat, or something would happen?
Well, that's bragging. I mean, The Israelis know pretty well that the first bullet they fire, they will be the target of missiles and incoming suicide drones from across the Middle East. They themselves say they are under incarceration from Lebanon to Syria in the first line, Iraq and Yemen in the second line. Iran would stand in the third layer, the last one to send the missiles. What they do is the backup in order to give credibility to the military threats against Iran. After, under the containment strategy of the United States that works through carrot and stick, on the stick side, it's the sanctions and credible military threat to change the calculations in Iran. The Iranians have learned the lesson. After Iran attacked Ain al-Assad and shut down the Global Hawk, captured the British ship and many other scenes in the Persian Gulf, they remained unanswered. The U.S. military threats lost credibility. After the U.S. exit from Afghanistan, there is no credibility in the U.S. military action for the Iranians. We have too many scenes in the Persian Gulf seeing that the Americans withdraw when Iranian boats arrive. So they gave the role to the Israelis to give credibility to this, military threat, and they failed again and again and again. What they do is operating between war and peace. Starting war is their red line because they know they cannot tolerate the devastating repercussions. What they do is security actions, terror, assassinations, sabotage. Whatever they've done, including attacks on Iran's Natanz facility twice, assassination of Iran's Dr. Fakhrizadeh, and so many other things, each and every of them has been, has received similar, similarly reciprocal action at the same level. If they assassinated Dr. Fakhrizadeh, 4 months later, the former chief of Israel's aerospace program was killed in an attack, according to Israeli media. If they attacked Iran's nuclear facility at Natanz twice, two of their the largest missile industry's production plant, Ofer, experienced blasts, major blasts, and the mushroom cloud was seen from over 200 kilometers away, according to Israeli media. If they attacked Iranian ships, all their ships came under attack from the Persian Gulf, the Sea of Oman, to the Mediterranean, and so on and so forth. So there is no budging. I believe there are some in the Muslim community, in the resistant front, including Iran, that would be happy if they see the Israeli regime would do something wrong to put an end to this problem in this region. But we don't take the Israeli threats any seriously, as a matter of fact.
Right. You don't take Israeli threats so seriously, as a matter of fact. Thank you so much. We had Mr. Mustafa Khoshcheshm joining us from Tehran. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Mustafa.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.